wonderful A-plusers out there. It is I, Stuart, here once again to give you guys another Stargirl review. This time we're going to be talking about Season 2, Episode number 12, Summer School, Chapter 12. And here we are, guys, at the penultimate episode of Season 2. This is basically the episode that kind of ties up a bunch of loose threads that we had throughout the season, but not too much. There's definitely a few that are still lingering, whether or not they're going to get solved in the next episode, or whether or not they're going to get continued in Season 3, we're definitely going to have to wait to find out. In fact, I actually kind of wish in retrospect that I made a list of different things that I'm wondering if they're going to be, resolved within the next episode. Like one of those major things being Starman himself, because while we've seen him a lot in flashbacks, we haven't really seen much of him in present day since the very first episode of the season. So it's still really hard to say where exactly they're going with that storyline, if what they're going to see is actually Starman, or if it's going to turn out to be a completely different person, or if maybe that's what they're worried about is Starman returns to Blue Valley, but of course everyone's immediate thought is, oh, this has to be a mind game of Eclipsos or something like that, and so therefore they completely ignore Starman, or they attack him thinking that he's supposed to be like an evil version of Starman. I don't know. It's definitely interesting. It's definitely interesting that they still have that plot thread. Whether or not they decide to do anything with it in the next episode, or if they wait until next season to really do anything with it, that's something we're gonna have to wait and find out. In this episode, we start out with what happened at the very end of the previous episode. Essentially, we know that Pat and Barbara basically were the ones who were able to locate the Shade, but before doing so, they found that his powers were being used in two different locations, one of them being the movie theater where they found him, but then we learned today that the other place was at the school, and we see that it's not necessarily that his powers were being used there, but we see that essence of Eclipso, who of course, gets his powers from the same area that the Shade does, which is the Shadowlands. We see basically essence of Eclipso is still there at the school, and the immediate reaction when Beth and Jenny come across it is of course to destroy it, because they're like, hey, any bits of Eclipso that's still out there, can't be good, so let's just get rid of it. But unknown to the two of them, the little bit that's left of Eclipso, it clings itself to Jenny's ring, and so for basically the majority of the episode, I want to say, she has a couple of scenes here and there, but for the most part, Jenny is kind of out of it for the rest of the episode. She's basically decommissioned. Now, most of the team thinks it's because of the ring taking up a lot of her energy and maybe just being a bit too much for someone as young as her to use, so her being in bed most of the episode makes sense to most people. But of course, we as the audience know there might be a little bit more to it. We still don't know fully what's going on, but we do have some general ideas at the very end of the episode that I'll get into when I talk about theories. Now, the next scene that we get, of course, is the group all heading back to Courtney's house, including Cindy and the original Dr. Midnight, which of course does create some interesting drama. What I really like about Cindy in this episode is that she seems to know how weird it is to be around, and she also seems to just know how much it bothers everyone, and rather than just kind of keeping her head down the entire time, it's almost like she's trying to make a scene from everything. She knows how weird it is for other people to be around her, and I gotta give credit to her. She gives 0 F's about it. She just is like, hey, I know none of you guys want me here, but it sucks for you. You guys need me. So I thought the way those scenes around Sydney were written were pretty funny. And something I really do like is Dr. Midnight and Beth working together. I guess they're both Dr. Midnight, but you know what I mean. The original Dr. Midnight, Charles McNider, working with Beth in order to locate the Shade. Now, apparently they have to triangulate his location based on the certain weather patterns, and maybe I think it was also based on different reports of people seeing things that aren't there, and they have to use that in order to track down where he's at, which if you were using one pair of goggles, I guess would take 8 hours, but when the two goggles are apparently working together, they can shorten the time down to 4 hours, and I'm just going to assume that makes sense. To me, it feels like they would both be working on the same server, and therefore it should take the same amount of time. It shouldn't subtract the time, but I don't know. I guess I'm just not a big computer expert guy, so I will just assume that the banter between Charles McNider and Beth are I'll just assume that those make sense and move on with the next scene in the episode. Now, the next thing that kind of happens, the next kind of important part that happens, is Mike trying to locate the Thunderbolt pin. Now, something kind of interesting about the way this episode is trying to tie up all these loose ends is that a lot of these loose ends have very different tones to them. Some of them are very lighthearted, as we're about to see with Mike as he tries to locate the Thunderbolt pen. But we also kind of see a few other lingers of plot threads, such as what was going on with Yolanda, and of course what was going on with Rick Tyler, that remind us that this season wasn't afraid to get dark when it needed to. So I think it's kind of, it's interesting when you're watching them as individual episodes, or just, when the episode is more kind of I guess when the episode is a little more focused. And since this episode wasn't necessarily focused on one specific thing, it did feel very bizarre, going from one scene that was very dark to just kind of having full-on whiplash to suddenly there's a giant, really fake-looking cheeseburger in the middle of this field. And that's what we get with Mike as he's trying to locate the Thunderbolt pen, is that he is finding a trail of essentially what has to be Thunderbolt's magic, along with finding out about like the purple lightning that's going on. And he eventually discovers that the one who has the pen now is Jakeem, one of his friends from the paper route. Although in this episode, I guess maybe I do got to make a little bit of a correction. In the first season, now I could be remembering the first season wrong, but I thought it was implied that the two of them were friends outside their paper route. But here in this episode, it kind of comes off like the two of them are just co-workers and nothing else. So maybe I was wrong when I was like looking back to Jakeem being name dropped in season 1. Like, I might be remembering how he was name dropped a little bit incorrectly, but here we do see that while they definitely don't have any bad blood between the two of them, they definitely don't come off as great friends or anything. They just come off as two people that work together, and that's about it. Now, Mike does need the pen back, but Jakeem really doesn't want to give it up, because for the first time it feels like he actually has a friend, and so Mike makes a deal with him, essentially letting him keep the Thunderbolt pen, but in return he has to help the JSA stop Eclipso from basically taking over the world, which Jakeem agrees to. We also get like a kind of funny line, I gotta say, with Jakeem wondering if the Justice Society is related to the Boy Scouts, and then him saying that he's really terrible at knots. And it was just funny because that's totally me, because I used to be in Boy Scouts, and I think the one thing that I really sucked at that I never got any better with were knots. And I don't know if it's just because I never tried hard to remember how they work, or if it's just because like I hated it so much so I never bothered to actually learn, or just maybe knots were just probably not my thing, I guess you could say, back in Boy Scouts. But yeah, anyways, it was just kind of a funny one-off line that just reminded me of Boy Scouts, so I felt like bringing it up. The banter between Jakeem and Mike is also pretty funny. I gotta give them some credit for that. And also I do like Mike being a good friend and helping him with the dishes before they have to go off and save the world, because of course, when you got chores and your parents don't know that the world is coming to an end, trying to explain to them that you have a genie in your pen that's going to help you save the world is a little difficult. So sometimes it's just easier to do the dishes rather than try to come up with a weird excuse as to why they can't do the dishes because they have to go save the world. So we have a scene where it's the two of them doing dishes, and it's kind of a wholesome moment. Now the next scene is not wholesome in any way, shape, or form, and I guess in one way you can kind of look at it if you think of it as Pat being a better father figure for Rick than his uncle definitely is. But regardless, what we get is Rick's uncle in the hospital and Pat going to visit him, trying to convince him to drop the charges, which of course goes about as well as you would expect. Now the dude tells Pat to of course go to hell, and I get what was going on in this scene, because at this particular moment they're on a bit of a time crunch. So before, whereas they might have been able to persuade Rick's uncle over time to do so, here Pat's just not having it, and we get like a very dark side of Pat that I don't think we've ever seen from Pat before. One where he essentially locks the door to the hospital room while also taking down the curtains for the window so no one can look into the hospital room, and what follows is some implied torture. Now keep in mind, this is Rick's uncle, so we know this is an asshole that definitely deserves what's coming to him. It's just surprising seeing this come from Pat, because while there were definitely hints that Pat had to be more than just, a simple driver, we've seen that he's able to, go toe-to-toe with people, in a fair fight, basically. But we don't know his full backstory. But for the first time, we find out that he was military before he ever worked for the original Starman's family. And we get a reveal from him where he mentions that there used to be a darker side to him, one that he tries to keep hidden from the world. And that's when we kind of cut away from that scene, and the very next shot is Rick being picked up by Pat, implying that whatever Pat did to Rick's uncle was definitely enough for him to drop the charges. And we also have Pat just kind of acting very casually about it, acting like, oh yeah, I don't know, he just decided to drop the charges, who knows why. So, on the one hand, it's very sweet what Pat did for Rick, but on the other hand, it's very much a, not necessarily out of character moment for Pat, but definitely one that it's a side of Pat that we as an audience haven't seen yet. And I'd be very curious to learn more about this, probably going into next season, or possibly even in the season finale, if they decide to, really go into whatever Pat's dark past was that he's keeping secret from everyone. Very, very curious to learn more about this. Now, the next thing that they have to kind of tie up, the next loose thread, is of course Yolanda, who is still refusing to wear the Wildcat outfit. But Courtney is trying, of course, again to convince her, telling her that it's not the same JSA without her, and that she needs her best friend to help back them up. But of course, Yolanda still refuses to put on the costume, and even after Courtney tries to tell her that she's not the first JSA member to take a life, it still isn't enough to convince Yolanda to join the team again. This doesn't work until we get Cindy, who essentially uses reverse psychology to get Yolanda back onto the team, basically by telling her, the exact opposite of what Courtney was telling her that, oh yeah, the team doesn't need you, you'll only be in our way, and then she also gives like kind of a not super surprising reveal, kind of one that I'm sure a lot of people already knew, but she reveals that she was actually the one to send her photo to the entire school, that it was never Henry to begin with. And this does lead to Yolanda coming back to the team, if for nothing else but to watch Courtney's back at the very least. Now, I gotta be honest, I'm not 100% sure why they needed to go into the ISA headquarters, but essentially Beth and Charles McNider end up happening to use the ISA database and believing that that'll give them some more info on Eclipso. I don't know if it's to help them track Eclipso down faster, or if it's because maybe they got a read on Eclipso's signature in the area, but regardless, they show up there and Eclipso is there waiting for them, basically wanting the rest of the JSA members to show up, saying that the last thing he needs to complete his master plan is Courtney's darkness. And it's here that we get a little vision into Jenny's dreams that she's been having ever since the very beginning of the episode. And we see that she's looking into the future and seeing all of the JSA members being taken down by none other than Courtney Whitmore herself. Now, this is just a vision, so we don't know for sure if this is actually what's going to play out in the next episode. However, I would be very surprised if they gave us this little tease and did nothing with it going forward. So yeah, that's the big cliffhanger that we end on. Now, it hasn't gone through yet, so for all we know, this may not even play out in the next episode, but part of me is really hoping it does, and especially because of the way they've been setting it up previously in the last couple of episodes. The idea of this whole season, mentioning the difference between being bad and being just straight up pure evil, and the thing about how a lot of us have a little bit of darkness inside of us. One of the biggest characters who seems to have not a lot of darkness in her when compared to a lot of her friends is Courtney Whitmore, and it kind of just comes down to her not only being raised really well by her mother, but also just not having quite the same struggles that a lot of her friends do. Now, not trying to say that Courtney has never had to struggle with her life. Definitely growing up without a father can be extremely difficult, but when you look compared to the struggles Yolanda and Rick face, where at the very least at least Courtney was raised by a mother that loved her, whereas you look at Yolanda and Rick, both of them being raised by parents that treat them like absolute crap. It definitely makes sense that we could see a lot more darkness from the two of them. But from Courtney, though, though, the darkness that we see in her doesn't come out as much just because, and I think it's just because she has so much love in her life. So now in the next episode, with the Eclipso being so sure that there's still darkness that he can grasp onto from Courtney, I'm very curious what that darkness is going to be and how it leads to her eventually being taken over by Eclipso. And if this possibly means that she becomes the next host for Eclipso, meaning that now the JSA have to find a new way to stop Eclipso without killing Courtney. Because let's face it, if Courtney becomes possessed by Eclipso, there's no way the JSA is actually going to kill Courtney to stop Eclipso. They are for sure going to have to find another way to do so. So I'm very curious what this is all going to lead to. It's definitely really exciting. This has been, like I said, season 2 of Stargirl has been absolutely amazing. And while I wasn't necessarily the biggest fan of the previous episode, and I definitely feel like this episode felt very mixed for me in a lot of ways. I did think this episode was good overall, and I think I enjoyed it a little more than the previous week's episode. But that said, if people didn't enjoy this episode, I can totally see why, because like I said, there were a lot of things going on in here, and it felt like they were really trying to wrap up as much as they could before they got into the season finale, which is something I kind of figured was going to happen. So that's partially why I'm not super disappointed by it. And for the most part, I think the way it was handled was pretty well done. Now we get into our season finale next episode, and I'm really excited to see how this all wraps up. But of course, guys, at the end of the day, these are just my A+ opinions. We here at A+ Opinions definitely want to know what you guys think, so definitely let me know what you thought of the episode in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, but of course, guys, above all, don't forget to keep it A+. I'll talk to you all next time.
Enjoy our content and want to be a part of helping our channel grow? Become a patron supporter. We have affordable tiers to choose from that offer a variety of exclusive and early access content, from audio files for all of our shows for you to enjoy on the road, access to our Discord community, and plenty of reactions, reviews, character breakdowns, and more. Check us out at patreon.com/A+opinions. And as always, remember, like, subscribe, and hit that bell notification so anytime we drop a brand new video, you will be notified.